Hello guys, everybody back. Perfect. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you. Thank you, Alicia. So everybody done with your Christmas shopping and everything? Ready to go? Good, good. Pleasure, Ray. Thank you, James. Thank you, Sarah. Thanks, Sarah. All right. Well, next week when we meet, we'll talk more about. Yeah, so I do miss you guys. We'll talk more. So here's an example. This is a basic operations example. This is patient billing, right? So patient billing, and this is one way to sort it, right? So I was thinking, I'm getting things off the internet and save it. So maybe create some just to give you a brief example of how to do it. So in this case, started by saying, what are the steps? First one, create patient file. Second, check with insurance provider and hospital. Third, collect final codes and transcriptions. Then you final quality control and audit of bills and protocols. Then edit structure and submit to business office. Then submit claim to insurer for remittance and payment. Receive and deposit payment, assign reimbursement and collection procedures. Follow up with insurer and AR is accounts receivables. Denial management, and then file and close. So in this case, you're saying this activity A takes possibly 1 day or 1 hour. Then activity B takes 1 hour. Activity C takes 2 hours. Activity D takes 1 hour. So C must have B completed before it can go through, right? Sorry. In this case, there isn't a predecessor. These things all have to be done one after the other. So in this case, we should simply say that B requires, or A, B, C are all done in parallel. Right? Then comes D. For D, which is final quality control and audit of bills and protocols, needs all A, B, and C completed. That takes an R. So D requires A, B, and C all completed. Because A, B, and C, and I don't know if this is the right way of crafting, or if I posed it properly, but assume they can all be done in parallel. D, these are all done in parallel. And then D follows, which requires A, B, and C to be completed. E requires B to be completed and D to be completed. F requires C to be completed. So you'll see that then comes E. E requires B and D to be completed before it can begin. Then comes F. F requires C to be completed before it can begin. Then comes G. G requires D and F to be completed. So that's G requires both D and F to be completed before it can begin. Then you've got H. H requires G and C to be completed, right? G and C to be completed before it can start. Then comes I. I requires B, E, and F done before it can begin. So I requires B, E, and F to be completed before it can begin. Then you've got denial management, which is J. J requires 1 R, but it requires G, H, and I to be completed. So G, H, and I needs to be completed before J can begin. And finally, for K to begin, it takes an R, but it requires H and J to be done. So H and J needs to be completed before K can begin. So by looking at that, you can simply say, now whether you want to set it up as a flowchart the only difference between this and a flowchart is that a flowchart will add some extra bit of decision making in terms of, is it there? If it is there, then do this. If it isn't there, then do that. That basically allows you to create a multiplicity of decision rules, right? And that's the difference. So from here, you can look at that. Well, you can run the entire early start, late start. So in this case, you know that D requires A, B, and C to be completed before it can begin. Because it requires all three to be completed, let me see if I can change the color of this set. How do I do that? All right, no. Because D requires A, B, and C to be completed, C takes 2 days, while B and A take 1 day. But because D requires all three of them completed, D has to wait for 2 days before it can begin. So the early start for D, is going to be 2 days because it is the max of A, B, and C, right? You take the max because you have to wait. You can't really start it after day 1 because C isn't done yet. C takes 2 days. And then, of course, D takes 1 day to complete. So D can early finish for D is going to be 2 plus 1, which is 3 days, right? Before E can begin. So E can only begin 3 days. So, and that's how it goes. So, and it's very straightforward. I hope you're all clear on this bit there. And then once you look at that, you'll see that activities C, F, G, H, J, and K are the ones that don't have any slack whatsoever, because that basically means they have to be completed on time. Have to be completed on time, right? So going forward, flowcharting is nothing but, as I mentioned, what to do just in case things happen. When we're doing per diagrams, there's never any issue about what do we do if things go wrong. We factor that in prior. But flowcharting adds one more thing, such as, in this case, check with insurance provider and hospital. If you do find that there is a disparity, then what do you do? If you find a disparity, then you go to the business office and recharge the codes or whatever it is. On the other hand, what do you do if it's denied? That's another way of tackling it, but not another way. It's just one more thing you can add to it. But I'll leave it to you to figure out whether you want to add that complication early on. I always say start with a basic PERT, because the PERT itself will give you tremendous amounts of transparency and clarity. And you can, frankly speaking, keep on delving deeper and deeper till you find things that you can really make some changes. And then after that, you can talk about some what-if scenarios. This is nothing but a what-if. What if there is a disparity? What if something is denied, right? What do you do then? Then you can add the complexity to it. By the way, just in case you're wondering what I meant by can add VSM icons, VSM is a type of process modeling technique which is called value stream mapping, which tells you where are the places that you add value. Is this something that you add value? Oftentimes when you're even planning this out, it's important to talk about this a bit, which is when you are creating a patient file. So let's talk about even what you do in your own companies. When you start mapping these out, it gives you a chance to examine whether these things could be consolidated. Do they require to be separate? For example, when you're creating a file, assume your patient file creation already has an API with all the insurance providers, which means the minute you're creating the patient file, one of the fields in the patient file would be possibly the patient's insurer and the insurance number. The minute you enter those, you might have a small button there called availability, or check for currency, and they can click on that. It'll immediately say if the insurance is valid, active, and all the stipulations that come with insurance, which suddenly means that these two can be combined into a single value set, because adding one extra R, even though it's being done in parallel, assume it could be done in parallel, is a waste. You could simply, take maybe a couple of seconds, because it's doing is hitting the insurance provider's database to see if it's an active insurance, and if what the stipulations are, can be sorted immediately. So it gives you a chance to think of, is this a place where I can consolidate? Because that seems to be a non-value added process, or a non-value added activity, or a non-value added task. I'm waiting to see. Alicia is typing something. I want to make sure that I respond to it before we move on. Oh, good. Thank you, Alicia. All right. So the other thing, I'm not talking about complications, right? Now you can add things such as a what if, which was the flow chart. Then you can also add, these are easy complications, but very useful complications to it. Something called RACI. RACI stands for responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. So the question is, for activity, who's the person responsible? Who's the person who's accountable? Who's the person who's consulted with? And who do we need to inform for the activity? Now, especially if the activity is on a critical path, you know that accountability, responsibility, who you're consulting for, possibly not, and who you're informing, going to be key, because these really can't go over time and over budget, right? But it also gives you an added, so you can figure out the slack. You can see if it has no slack, it's on the critical path. So anytime if slack is 0, then it's on the critical path. And slack basically means when your early start and later start, or early finish and late finish, have no extra time allowed. So you need to really finish things right on time. And then need to know who's responsible for it, who's accountable for it, who's consulted for it, and who's informed for it, or who's informed on it. Once you know that, you suddenly get a good sense in terms of even opening this information out, or to various stakeholders in the process, so that you know that people start getting a bit of skin in the game. And that oftentimes adds a lot of intrinsic value. Might not really change the project scope and the project runs and the schedule, but it adds a lot of intrinsic value, because suddenly people are forced to take ownership. Even otherwise, they would have said, oh yes, we knew that you were running this activity. I really don't know. Which activity does it lead to? How important was that? I really don't know. Was it very important? So you can sort of kill multiple birds with the same stone. Hope that helps though. So next one, wanted to give it to you as group or individual exercise, whatever you want to do, whether you want to do it with your own set or for this week, which was, if you are to look at this set of activities, so this is, this is simply put a deployment set, right? Which starts off with activity A. It says, set up the project acquisition team. That's the origin. Takes 2 weeks. Then write down the software requirements. It requires setting up the acquisition team. Will take 2 weeks. Develop a contractor evaluation that will be used to evaluate proposals. Requires writing the software requirements. Takes 1 week. Identify and select potential contractors. Requires setting up the project acquisition team, which means suddenly you know that both activity D and activity B need activity A to be completed, right? Takes 1 week. Then develop and send out a request for proposal. So you're sending out an RFP to potential contractors. Requires both B and D to be completed. So you need to complete both B and D in order to send the RFP. It takes 4 weeks. Then audit candidate contractors, select one contractor, negotiate and sign agreement contract based on selected contractors. Requires C and D, takes 2 weeks. After that, prepare the definition of functional specifications. Requires completion of F, which is the auditing and signing, takes 5 weeks. Develop a software testing plan. Requires G to be completed, takes 2 weeks. Software customization phase 1 requires G. So you now see that these 3 require G to be completed, right? So 3 things: developing the software testing plan, software customization phase 1, and purchase and install hardware all require G to be completed before they can move on. Then test the first release, which requires H, I, and J to be completed before it can start. Develop a training plan for key users. That takes 1 week, requires K to be completed. Train key users, requires L and N to be done, takes 2 weeks. Software customization phase 2, requires K to be done, takes 6 weeks. Test the second release, requires M, takes 1 week. Software customization phase 3, requires N, takes 3 weeks. Test the final release, requires P, takes 2 weeks. And finally, software deployment and project sign-off, which requires Q to be completed and takes 4 weeks. So if you were to do it individually, please diagram the whole PERT for it, and then figure out what the early start, late start, early finish, and late finish would be, and figure out what the critical paths would be. So it should be a very easy, very straightforward exercise, but it'll give you a sense of, even as you're doing your own individual projects for the end of this course, give you a sense of, all right, how could I set it up? Gives you a nice template where you start doing it a bit hands-on rather than I just mumbling my way through. And so there's an important topical note out here, which is something called project crashing. Project crashing is basically nothing but a type of operational project crisis management, which basically means that just in case you're realizing something is on critical path, or perhaps even not on critical path, but you're running so close to call that you might not get something done, you start getting more resources to, simply put, shorten the project per period. So the project crashing is not always a good idea. It basically says that it wasn't planned well, because anytime you're getting more resources or you're requiring more resources, it's automatically increasing your budget. So all you're saying is, I have to increase the budget in order to diminish the time. I need more people to get it done, which basically says we're not planning it very well. But the way they oftentimes calculate it is, what's the cost of crashing the project, which is getting more resources involved in it, minus the normal cost. and what would it be in the normal time and crash time. So if you say that the crash cost is going to be $30,000, which is perhaps the crash cost minus the normal cost. So, and the normal cost would have been $10,000. But by crashing the project, the normal time it would have taken might have been 12 weeks. And now the crash time is going to be 10 weeks. So it basically says it's nothing but 20K divided by 2 weeks of savings, right? So you're basically saying, I'm going to spend 10K per week in order to shorten, for 2 weeks, in order to shorten the lifetime of the project. Question is it worth it? But that's something that's so much on a case-by-case basis. There's no real mechanism. The whole idea is best way to plan it is to not bear any chance of crash costs, because this 20K that you're adding in, regardless of the amount of the time you're saving, is still going to be flagged as an over budget. Does that make sense? Is everybody okay? Did I get everybody fall asleep? Thank you, guys. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, James. Yes, so Alicia, all I wanted to mention was that it's important to know whether adding that extra money in order to shorten the period is useful or not, because you're suddenly reducing your return on investment, because you're now saying the same thing I would have done otherwise. I now need more time to do it, but perhaps a little quicker. But the question is, why wouldn't you have scheduled it for 10 weeks first and define the resources early on, rather than sort of trying to scurry last minute and try to hasten things and suddenly increase costs, which are, and anytime you're increasing costs, you're automatically creating a flag. Alicia, did that make sense? Thank you, madam. All right, so moving on. So this is an example of a flow chart, but basically anytime you see these rectangular markers, the rectangular markers simply put define the activities, and anytime you see these what do you call it, parallelograms of sorts, they basically means is that there's a decision that needs to be taken there, right? So if you were only doing PERT, you would simply just have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 activities. But because this is flowchart, all you've done is you've added the complications of what if something goes wrong at a certain stage. That's all it is. So that's the big difference between. In this case, it starts off with certain things and periodic innovation reporting, assess feasibility, check business viability, check the ROI. If internal development is feasible, yes or no. If it's yes, then assign resources, build operations, a budget, allocate a timeline. Once you've built you've done all of these, is the scheduling competitive for market entry? Are you too early, too late? If the answer is yes, begin building your materials master, your master planning schedule, your bill of materials. Or if no, then calculate the costs of operations crashing. by speeding up activities. On the other hand, if internal development is not feasible, is there a chance to acquire or to partner with somebody else? If the answer is yes, then hand over to executive group for options and a new set of project timelines begin. But this is nothing but a very basic draft of how we can work a PERT and then create these complications onto them. But so once again, a PERT is nothing but a quick overview of all the activities and tasks that go into a process and the time it takes and what one activity depends upon in order to get it completed. Tells you which ones have more resource slack or a time to where you can sort of give it a bit of respite or sequester resources strategically in order to meet your goals. And then it also tells you the ones that are in critical path, which means the activities that have to be completed on time. Because if you don't, it's going to go over budget and push everything forward, right? And you can do that by calculating the early start, late start, early finish, late finish. Once you have a PERT, if you want to add a complication, which is, but what if this goes wrong? Anytime you're adding a complication, you're adding something like this, which is saying, is this project viable? Or sorry, is this particular bit viable? Anytime you're asking a question after each activity, then it's a good idea to convert that into a flowchart. And finally, when you're creating a PERT, it's a good idea to create a RACI template, which stands for who's responsible for that activity, who's accountable for that activity, who's consulted on that activity, and who's informed on that activity. And a pretty decent notion is to publish that internally to all the stakeholders who are responsible, accountable, consulted and informed, so that everybody has a good snapshot of what is going on, what needs to be done, and whose feet would be held to the fire, just in case things go wrong. And oftentimes, just by making it transparent, you can reduce the chances of potential calamities. Everybody okay? Thank you, Stella. So these are different variations in representation. You can see, I'll let you look at them in person, or at your own time. But these are nothing but these are just copied of the internet, and they're just different representations. Now let's talk a little bit about how I tell you that I've always told you that I love at least figuring out some mechanism for synergies. Would anybody be kind enough to tell me what you talked about in capital markets today? Sorry guys, just in case you didn't hear me. Can anybody tell me what you guys chatted about in capital markets? Options, okay. All right. So let's even think about options. So let's look at an old options process. An option is nothing but a separate exchange, which is typically run by CBOE, which is the Chicago Board of Options Exchange. And it's a separate exchange that basically is nothing but a clearinghouse for contracts that bet on stocks or on bonds or on Forex. It doesn't really matter. And I don't want to repeat the same stuff, but it's important to just doing a quick recap. So an option is nothing but it's a derivative that gives you a chance to be a part of a speculation game without actually committing to it, right? So an option is just because it's called an option, it gives you the option to purchase or not purchase when time comes. So common set, and typically, you've heard of these, you do it possibly on your own many a times. The main pieces you typically follow are things like whether it's the money or outside of the money, which is OTM versus ITM. You look at call options or put options, right? And a call is also known as speculating long. When you think the price of something is likely to increase in the future, you purchase a call. Very much like if you think the price of, I don't know, Amazon after its biggest Cyber Monday is going to, Amazon's going to have a fantastic holiday sales run. You might say, so you've got two options. One option goes is purchase Amazon stock. I don't remember how much Amazon stock's going for. I think about $1,800 or so. Let's assume it's going for $1,800. And you say, all right, I would like to purchase an Amazon stock. But then you say, you know what? I really don't want to purchase an Amazon stock yet, but I want to bet on which way Amazon is heading. If you think Amazon is going to do well, you would say that instead I'm going to buy a series of Amazon options. Now, of course, as you know very well, options typically expire third Friday of every month. And if you buy an option, you're no longer buying the stock, but you're buying the chances of a stock moving in a certain direction. So if you say that I think Amazon's going to go up, you would buy a call option. If you said that Amazon's going to go down, you'd buy a put option. Right? But these options were very interesting because it sort of ties right into what I have out here. It was just a guess when I was adding this, when you told me in the morning that you've got Nero the Fiddler teaching you money and capital markets from 8 to 10. But when you're managing it, typically it goes into everything from trade support to confirmation to reconnaissance to settlement to reference data to internal reporting to external reporting, collateral margin, client services, asset servicing. So once again, if you're buying an Amazon option, if you were to just go right now on finance.yahoo.com or finance.google.com and click on the option set, you'll see that it's always set up as a straddled mechanism where it'll say that, what do you want to bet on? Assume Amazon is 1,800. Do you want to bet that Amazon is going to go upwards of $2,000 by the third Friday of February? And there'd be options that would say, if you want to buy an option, you always have to buy options in terms of a contract. And one contract is buying 100 single units of each. You might say, find that the bet for Amazon going up to $2,000 by the third Friday of February might be about $3 per option. You have to buy them in chunks of 100, and I'm just making up these numbers, not the 100, but $3 an option. And you would say, well, it is out of the money. Amazon is 1,800, and I think it has a particular good play upwards. I'm going to put $300 into buying Amazon options that will expire in the third Friday of February 2020, and I'll put in $300 for it. If the option or if the price of the stock moves closer to 2,000, you will make money. If, on the other hand, it does not, like a stock or unlike a stock, where even if the value drops to 1,600, you still own $1,600. Option drops are oftentimes much more sensitive and much more volatile. you're likely to lose the entire $300, or sometimes little less than that, but the chances of loss, so which means the chances of volatility, are much greater in options. Now, having mentioned that, on the other hand, if you said that, Amazon is doing well, but I think they're spending too much, they're getting into too many useless investments and too many other things, and I don't think they're going to have a good earnings per share, even though they've had a fantastic holiday season, and I think it's going to go down to 1700. You would now purchase a put option that would say for 1700 expiring the third week of February, or third Friday of February. And that might be priced right now at maybe $2.10, and you have to buy 100 shares, which means you'll spend $210. If it actually drops, you will make money. If it goes the other way and actually Amazon makes a profit, and you're likely to lose the whole set. So an option is nothing but a pure speculative move where you're saying, I'm going to buy the chances, I'm going to pay for the chances that a stock is going to move in a particular direction without actually buying the stock. If it does, so you suddenly don't have to buy an Amazon stock for 1800. You can now, if you're very, very good and you think you can game the market very well, which is never a good idea, you can now say, I'm going to instead buy $1,800 of options because the speculative returns are higher, but of course, with returns are the risks. It could also become zero, which goes back into the way a single option happens is all options are cleared by the CBOE, right? So that's the options clearinghouse, which means anytime you're purchasing an option, you're basically, based on the volume and the pricing, previously the way it happened was you would call your broker and you would say, hey, I think Amazon is going to move in a certain direction and I'm thinking of a particular set. So the broker would write that down, would send that paper contract slip to the clearinghouse, which would be in the CBOE, the lower level, or anybody who does reconciliation, and they will look at the exact time. So by the time you've even spoken to your broker, and the broker has written everything into a slip or onto a slip and sent it downstairs, upstairs, wherever it is laterally, it might have been another 10 minutes. In 10 minutes, because of the volume and because of the fact that the market is in motion and prices are changing, the price of your option changes too. So a huge piece, and that's why they say that if you really want to look at operational changes and pure operational lean, look at finance. Because finance is based on capital markets, their timeliness is of the essence. And this whole idea of lean and running things on demand is particularly important. So the idea right now is what used to be filled, this is known as an order filling, in 10 minutes previously, if you were lucky, or if we were lucky, now takes possibly a 10 millisecond stamp. The minute you say, I want to buy this, click submit, what happens is few interesting things happen. Firstly, this trade allocation goes on. Let me mark that in red. So the trade allocation that happens, there's no longer a paper confirm. What happens is there's an automated translate. This is where you're talking about process re-engineering. These two things have completely disappeared. So it creates a date timestamp, and the timestamp is in the milliseconds. And it puts your order into something called a CBOE queue. And the queue basically works on first in, first out, the FIFO mechanism. The first order that's placed in goes through it, is immediately settled at the settlement price at that particular period of time. and then the next order is moved through. And then what happens is, so the settlement happens automatically. Then the minute the settlement happens, it also creates a log of the settlement, which is known as a reference data for the option, right? So the basically means this was placed, this was out of the money or in the money, and placed at exactly this much at this time, sent from this person with a certain a stipulation for how much they want to purchase based on the volume and based on the price, and then it automatically creates a single reference data. Then, of course, that is sent for internal reporting. Internal reporting is also known as operations or financial operations. So FinOps compliance is a huge area. So it's called FinOps compliance. So FinOps compliance will basically look at, was there any chance of insider trades? Was there any chance of somebody who does market analysis for us also, and that's why you'll see that a lot of your options trades will say that, do you know anybody who works for the company, or for anybody who works for the agency or this particular site? Suppose you use TD Ameritrade. TD Ameritrade has a fantastic set called Think or Swim, and now that they've purchased Charles Schwab. Charles Schwab used to have a fantastic options platform called Options Express. So TD Ameritrade and Charles Schwab, now they've merged, well, they'll ask you, do you have anybody who works for Charles Schwab or does analysis for Charles Schwab? That's your internal reporting. So it's automatically, the minute the reference data is automated, internal reporting happens. So think of it, this is nothing but a per chart. The whole setup, in this case, this part takes about, used to once upon a time take about 2 days. Now it possibly takes, less than 1 minute. That's the level of operational re-engineering. Then, of course, internal compliance has to send it to external reporting, which would be something like the SEC and the Chicago board, of course. And then you have to look at the collaterals and margins, right? So, of course, companies make money because they work off something called the spread. And the spread is nothing but the difference between the buy price and the sell price. And they will reconcile the margins once options have been fulfilled and the market has actually stopped being active, which is only upon closing. So this is called end of day forwarding. And then, of course, you go into client services, which is now, of course, they're using a lot of analytics to figure out what type of options are they interested in. Are there certain sectors that this particular client is interested in? Because then you can suddenly sign them up for interesting sector information or information on the fly, right? And then, of course, it's asset servicing, which is how do you make sure that you can increase shareholder wealth, that stuff, or your client wealth. But this is an this is an example of how what you even talked about today in terms of options plays into how originally an option used to be traded and how an option really works. And how by just looking at the processes, you can say, hey, we didn't want A, B, C, and D and E to be operating in sequence that would take 2 days. Instead, we can fill the whole setup in less than 1 minute. And that's an example of something called operational consolidation. Does that make sense? Or did I just say something absolutely rubbish? Thank you, Stella. Thank you.
Makes sense.
Thank you very much. All right. So let's move forward. So if you're talking about operational transformation in financial marketing, fintech is possibly the biggest player in the market right now. It's more than $30 billion industry. Is expected to get into 650 billion or so by 2022. It is massive, and that is a fascinating industry too. Or actually, it's no longer an industry; it's actually a sector. It's that large. So one thing is, and just about very much like most industries, especially fintech and capital markets are moving the big shift from touch-based to information-based servicing. The whole idea is, previously the idea was it was relationship-based servicing. Now it's information-based servicing. Less focus in terms of how's your son, daughter, husband, wife, golf cab doing, and more focus on, I'm going to give you much more relevant, requisite information on the fly that will make you make better decisions, better recommendations that's going to make you better money. And that's the whole set, is going to simplify your life, increase efficiencies, and at the end of the day, add a sense of respite to your own timeline, to your otherwise busy timeline. So you'll see that, talking about industries, the two, of course, big industries, banking and capital markets. And the vertical functions are transaction processing in banking, retail banking, loans and mortgage servicing, and card servicing. I think last time when we met in person, I was mentioning to you, and I think remember Ben was mentioning about the fact that how the Apple credit card has built-in AI prejudice, sort of a gender prejudice, and I think you're quite spot on about it. But what's particularly interesting is that card servicing is changing, and I think I was mentioning to you. Card servicing typically used to be a process where you apply for a card, the application is reviewed, reconciled, goes through compliance, then a card is actually created for you and then shipped to you via mail. And then if it is a debit card, it would also follow in separate, so to maintain separation of duties and separation of processes, a separate PIN number would be sent to you. Today, the whole idea is, for example, with the Apple Card, the minute you apply for it and you get approved, it takes about 20 seconds, and you have the Apple Card automatically uploaded into your wallet in about 2 more seconds. And it doesn't carry a number, where suddenly what you're doing is you're leveraging analytics and BI, regardless of how biased the analytics or BI might be, to say that the quicker we send the card to the person, the faster they're going to start using it. Says this order to fulfillment has dramatically changed. You see the same order to fulfillment change with transaction processing, where I can't even remember the last time I ever went and deposited a physical check. You take a picture of the check and you send it, because at the end of the day, all a teller does when you give him or her a check is basically take a picture of the check and send it. And they realize that, why are we going through 5 extra steps when we could have just consolidated it into one step, which can be done 24/7 anywhere and everywhere, right? So for transaction processing, increasing consolidation and centralization is heavy. Increasing offshoring and nearshore is heavy, right? So somebody has to reconcile, and the idea is, don't have your internal people reconcile, build a reconciliation algorithm and have any place who will just provide some degree of cheap monitoring over it under contract, take care of that. So it's typically offshored or nearsourced. And then retail banking, Standardization of processes are becoming very, very important. Everybody follows the same procedure, follows the same routines. Efficiencies are key. If efficiencies is built in one branch, one setup, then use it everywhere else. Adding new technology and expertise is becoming key, because just about every single place technology is running this show. Loans and mortgage servicing, lot of consolidation, and I think I just read that Zillow is getting into massive amounts of consolidation and centralization, where they're saying that we're going to remove this whole idea of having people show houses and do this and do that. You can do virtual tours, you can place an order, we'll close the order very, very quickly. We'll even be able to predict your order and the price of the house, to even buy the house from you and then put it into the market all by themselves. So it's very interesting. And if they become the face, they're no longer a buyer, but they're also a vendor. And maybe housing is going to go into something like a vendor managed inventory, where the vendor is managing the inventory and Zillow just starts acting like a clearinghouse, where all you're doing is spot transactions rather than future transactions. What we do with housing today, we're changing the entire game plan. And then, of course, neo-sourcing and offshoring. And of course, with capital markets, application processing and account servicing is huge. New technology expertise, analytics and business intelligence, and of course, orders management, which we just talked about for quite a while, is another big piece of the puzzle. Guys, I'll stop here before we move into any more. The main thing is understanding the general set of what we do and how we do it, and focusing on just on the modeling part. Next time when we meet, or actually next week when we meet, I'll talk more about some of these capacity models, and we'll return to, I do have to ask you, make sure that you have Solver on your computers. We will do a little bit of optimization modeling, because that always comes in very handy. And we'll do a quick run through, and then we'll talk about capacity planning and how to manage and how to decide on how many resources you need to get your things done. And then we'll call it a day. And till then, I hope you're all having a fantastic time, have had a brilliant Thanksgiving, and getting ready for a very Merry Christmas. So I'm answering questions, and I'm going to be, I'll be right out here just in case you have any questions. And do respond to the PERT chart, PERT diagram that was in one of the previous slides there. Please do send it to me by next week when we meet. Any questions? Thank you, TJ.
Have a great weekend.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Dave.
Dr. Dada, this is Robbie. I have a question.
Yes, sir.
So for what's due tomorrow, did you want some kind of supplemental document to kind of give you some background information on the A3?
Sure, yes. If you need to offer, because I typically don't require it, because sometimes you're also dealing with things that might have a little bit of confidentiality associated with it. If you don't want to let me know about certain things, but otherwise, very nice, Renee. That is fantastic. So if you're ever if you think that you could sort of disseminate that information to me, and of course, I'll keep it confidential. Please do that. Would be absolutely brilliant, Robbie.
Okay, great. I'll do that.
Thank you, sir. All right, guys, have a lovely day, brilliant time. Enjoy the 50-degree weather tomorrow, and I'm itching to see all of you next week in person.
Thank you. See you then.
See you then. Bye. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, James. Thank you, Joe. Goodbye, James. Billiards soon indeed, Robbie.
Okay, good.
Sounds good.
I'll let you know when I'm available.
Yes, I'll leave. We're leaving next Tuesday, not this Tuesday, but the Tuesday after that. So either then or once we return.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Sounds good. Well, have a good. Well, I'll see you next weekend. I'll see you next weekend. So have a good week.
You'll see me next weekend. Bye. Goodbye then. Take care. Give Chelsea my regards.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Did you hear that?